In the last year, I've tested about 6 different pairs of barefoot shoes spanning across 5 of the biggest brands in minimalist footwear. After a year of experimenting and using minimalist footwear, I'm ready to share some of the pros and cons. And I'm hoping that by sharing some of my own anecdotal evidence, I can help you decide whether they might be worth trying out for yourself, because some pretty wild things happened in the last year. About a year ago, I started noticing that I was consistently having problems with my knees and my lower back, and my ankle mobility was atrocious. I started to feel like every time I would get under a barbell to do back squats, it was a gamble on whether or not I would throw my back out or suffer from feeling like my knee was going to blow up under the pressure. So, talking with other people, the general recommendations were to fix my squat form, stop squatting, or to just accept that the feeling of falling apart is just the natural progression of aging. I started to seek out solutions to the problems I was facing, and like probably most people who end up looking into barefoot shoes, I noticed that a ton of people who were super knowledgeable about injury prevention and rehab were wearing or recommending the use of barefoot or minimalist footwear. So initially I kind of wrote it off, to be honest. It just seemed wildly impractical. It seemed like the kind of luxury that influencers who are otherwise unemployed get to take advantage of, because their lifestyles never really demand them to do anything difficult outside of exercise. I kept thinking, like, what about construction workers or medical personnel or people who are on their feet all day or work in environments where barefoot shoes would be dangerous? What about parents who have to chase after their kids when going on walks on concrete sidewalks or asphalt? It just seemed too niche to be a one-size-fits-all solution. But the problem of my chronic pain still loomed over my head, so I was still seeking a solution. So my solution was very much aligned with how I treat my fitness in general. So I was going to treat barefoot shoes kind of like an experiment. And I resolved to use barefoot shoes exclusively for training at first. I did a lot of research, and as you've probably come to find out, one of the most frequently recommended brands is Vivo Barefoot. I decided to go with the FG Knit or FG Trail Knit Vivos because they had a little bit taller of a stack height with a more aggressive tread than the basic Primus Vivos. So I figured if I really ended up liking them, they might prove to be a lot more versatile. I followed the recommendation to err on the side of ordering the shoes a bit larger because people oftentimes make claims that the more you wear barefoot shoes, the more your feet spread out and almost seem to grow. But they showed up and I started wearing them, and I was kind of shocked at how well they fit. I would describe it as feeling a lot like putting a sock on, but with some protection and grip under your foot. The sizing recommendation was a little off-putting though to me because they 100% felt too long. Like, it felt like I had a solid inch or more of room in my toe. But I bought into the idea that my feet would spread out and stuck with that size. I didn't replace them or anything. But we'll talk about that later. For me, I actually started getting a little excited about it, and I really got into a lot of the recommendations that people make, like working on knee and ankle mobility simultaneously with switching to barefoot shoes, working on your foot strength, as well as trying to be barefoot as much as you can. At the time, I was always wearing cushion shoes around my house, so the transition to wearing nothing on my feet most of the time was pretty drastic. Even though I told myself I was just going to use them for training, I got really excited to dive kind of head first into the world of minimalist footwear, and I really couldn't help it. I started wearing them pretty much everywhere whenever I could, and the initial shock of how slow you have to move and how much differently you have to walk and interact with the world around you was pretty eye-opening to me. That awareness of the world under your feet was one of the first benefits that I noticed, and then training with barefoot shoes was a completely other level. I felt like I had so much more balance carrying heavy weight around, and I felt so grounded and powerful. When you switch to barefoot shoes, you'll likely realize that you have a ton of mobility issues that probably stem from wearing normal footwear. For example, my ankle mobility when doing back squats was terrible, and I had to relearn my squat form with a much lower weight and kind of start over again. I used linear progression to work my way back up in weight with the squat and immediately noticed that they were causing way less pain than they were previously. I was skeptical initially about whether this was due to the change in footwear or just from reducing the weight. But another pretty underrated immediate benefit was the change to the stimulus for my training sessions. The feeling of training in barefoot shoes is so unique compared to what I was used to doing, And if you've been training for a while, you know how easy it can become to kind of get bored and start to go on autopilot during your workouts. Barefoot shoes were the thing that got me focusing and really paying attention to my movement patterns again. Over time, I started to notice that my knee pain, my low back pain, my ankles, my joints in general just no longer were hurting during my workouts. And if I ever did notice any small tweaks or weird pains during a movement, I could easily notice if my form or my bracing was bad and make small adjustments, and the pain would go away immediately. This was totally different than when I was primarily using traditional athletic footwear, and minor injuries would seem to sneak up and completely derail my training. I ended up loving wearing my Vivos so much that during the winter time, I couldn't tolerate wearing my stiff normal boots anymore, and I bought a pair of Zero boots. By that point, I was pretty much exclusively wearing minimalist footwear, other than when I went to work. In fact, I became so accustomed to using minimalist shoes that now the only time that I really experience knee, back, and ankle pain is when I am forced to wear normal shoes. Wearing barefoot shoes for this year has absolutely made me spoiled to them, and it feels like I'm actively hurting myself anytime I have to wear normal boots or running shoes for things like performance-based running or things like digging with a shovel for yard work, which brings me to some pretty big negatives of barefoot shoes. Unfortunately, barefoot shoes in their current state are not a singular solution to every problem. I learned this when I tried to dig some mulch beds in my yard using barefoot shoes and quickly realized that I would completely be ineffective with a shovel, not being able to kick, stomp, or jump on it without injuring myself. Additionally, I still haven't fully transitioned to using barefoot shoes for running. The type of fatigue that barefoot shoes create is way more muscular, so running long distances fatigues my calves way before I ever get the endurance benefits from running. So this creates kind of a dilemma for me. If I want the endurance adaptation, I usually just suffer through wearing normal running shoes, and then my knees and low back pay for it later. But the reality is that with barefoot shoes, you simply will never be as fast as you were wearing normal running shoes. There's really no way around it. So if sprinting and running are your primary focus, there are special events where people wear minimalist footwear for running, but it's pretty niche at this point, and you'll just have to accept that you'll be slower than you would otherwise. And as far as the claims about your feet growing or spreading out, I think that's mostly nonsense. At least in my personal experience, you can order true to size without worrying about growing into your barefoot shoes. Other than these two specific cases, I really do think that minimalist shoes have wildly improved my health over the last year, and has gotten me excited about mobility and natural movement in a way that I never was before. It's been a year now of wearing barefoot shoes, and I feel stronger, more stable, and way less injury prone. If you're interested in checking them out, I made a video of my recommendations for how to transition into barefoot shoes, and you can check out my channel for more. As always, use what works best for you.